I mentioned things were going to be a little looser on Backlash today. I just want to bring you some interesting people with perspectives. And one is my former next door neighbor growing up. He was about 6 years older than I am. Name's Robert Hauser. You should really Google The Ballad of Trump and put in Robert Hauser too to make sure you get it on YouTube. It's better than all the other MAGA, M-A-G-A, anthems and whatever, the way people tried to capitalize on Trump last year. It's just really good. Trust me on that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about that something that people would like to associate with Trump, which is Russia. But we're not talking about Putin. We're talking about Rob's unusual level of interest in Russia, Tsarist Russia, and Rasputin, and much else. And it's just an interesting hobby. He's written some great stuff on it. Hasn't been published yet, but I've read it. And I don't know, I just want to bring Rob on the show. What's up, Rob?
Hey, what's up?
So I think it would be interesting for people to know how you got so fascinated by the end of Tsarist Russia and the Russian Revolution and stuff. I mean, it's not really your background. It's not your educational background. How did that develop, that interest?
I saw a documentary. I think I saw something on the History Channel. It was something about just the sort of Greek tragic nature of it. I was interested in the Titanic, which is kind of a similar story. You know, it's like inevitable tragedy with people not wanting to. But plus the idea of just Nicholas II, he was a guy who was born into a role that he just was unable to fulfill, and he always had the sense that something was going to go wrong, and he was just waiting for it, but he couldn't do anything about it, and there's something just...
Give us a little background about him. That kind of reminds me of Prince Charles of England, not really what one would want from a royal, but I don't know that much about Nicholas II, so maybe you could tell us some background on him.
Well, actually, he's related to the British royals.
Oh, no doubt.
In fact, when they did the DNA, when they found the grave in 1991, and they did the DNA, they used Prince Philip, Elizabeth II's husband, is related to one of Alexander's older sisters. I think he's a grandson of her older sister. So. But the Romanovs who ruled Russia were actually more European than Russian.
Yeah, and
they've been, married.
A lot of
they're all related to Queen Victoria.
That distanced them a little bit from the Russian peasants, and also the communists, or the aspiring communists, took advantage of that to say how out of touch the Tsar's family was. But what was his personality like? I mean, was he just not the kind of person who was meant for leadership?
Well, he was kind of like the weak son of a strong father. Like his father, Alexander III, was most of his relatives were really big. The males in his family were really big. Like his father was 6'5", like 300 pounds, was renowned for his physical strength. He could bend tire irons in half. He used to bend coins with his fingers.
Really?
He could tear packs of playing cards in half. And he was like a real manly man, and he kind of thought that he had the idea that like a real Russian Tsar should have something of the barbaric about his nature. And, he was kind of... And Nicholas II always kind of grew up in the shadow of him, and his father called him a girly man.
Oh.
And, Nicholas II...
I'm not sure he used that term necessarily from Saturday Night Live, but yes, I know what you mean. It's kind of a funny term. But I think I know what you mean on that one. So he was just sort of the runt.
Yeah, he was just the wrong man for the time. I mean, if the Tsar system was going to be saved, like if the revolution was going to be put down, it would have taken a really strong, decisive ruler like Putin or Nicholas I or Peter the Great or somebody like that. And Nicholas II just wasn't. He just wasn't the man. He just, he was a weak. He wasn't stupid, but he was not decisive.
Yeah.
And he was too much under the control of his wife.
It seems like a problem with the hereditary system in general is there might be an ideal person for the job in troubling times, but who's to say it's going to be the son of the current ruler? I mean, the odds are probably pretty much against that. Who will be the person with the leadership qualities? You know who it reminds me of? You ever see Braveheart? The son of the ruler there who was married to the... Yeah. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Right, yeah, Longshank's son, the one that they threw his advisor out the window, yeah. Yeah, that was always a problem in Russia. They had a number of retarded son of Ivan the Terrible, I think, was a retard. And
Oh, he actually was. No kidding.
But he was disabled. You know, it was. And you know, they had other ones that just weren't up. And I guess Peter the Third, he was kind of nuts.
Uh-huh.
That was one Catherine the Great had killed, and then his son Paul the First got killed by the palace guards. He was another kind of witty one.
You can't expect them all to be Octavius Caesar, I guess. You know, who turned out pretty well, or King Solomon in the Bible, son of King David, who turned out pretty well.
Well, it seems like they in Russia, they always tended to alternate weak czars with, like, terrible czars. Like, I say terrible, like Ivan the Terrible. Like, you know, like Peter the Great he was great. He did great things, but he was ruthless.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he didn't care how many people got killed trying to do what he wanted to do.
Interesting. So, tell me, what about the documentary grabbed you? I mean, there must have been something in the story. There's so many stories from history, so many places. I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough how well you wrote about this. I showed my parents; they loved what you wrote too, and I mean, you really wrote quite eloquently about this. But at some point, something must have sparked your interest. What was it in that documentary?
A lot of it was just had to do with how they died.
Uh-huh.
I just got curious about, and then if you read the actual story about how they were killed and what happened to their bodies afterwards, it almost is like somebody could make a Quentin Tarantino movie out of it. It's so bizarre. It's just, you know, it was like a comedy of errors. Like they buried him twice, and it took them about 3 days.
Can you tell?
You know, the execution didn't go off. It was a botched execution. And plus, later on, I got the last house that they were imprisoned in, the Apatiev house in the Ekaterinburg. You know, you had these 4 beautiful girls locked up in this house, and they were from anywhere from 17 to 22 years old, and most of the people guarding them were the same age. So there was a lot of sexual tension going on in there.
I can imagine.
And there was actually evidence that one of the daughters might have had a little some kind of a tryst with one of the guards, and that might have had something to do with the crackdown in security, which led to their execution.
It was not.
That'd be a good.
Yeah. Oh, that would make great drama. Someone really needs to pick this up. But it would make communists look bad. So I imagine Hollywood wouldn't be into it. But can you take us a little bit more from the beginning of that and just tell the story of what happened to the Czar after the Bolsheviks seized power in a fairly bloodless way, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. Well, the Czar system pretty much. What happened was I'm sorry.
Lost your train of thought. It's okay. You're saying the Tsarist system?
Oh, yeah. It was pretty much a revolution of the palace guard. I mean, Nicholas was trying to manage the war, and he was at a headquarters about 500 miles away from the capital.
Uh-huh.
And there was riots in St. Petersburg, and his most reliable guards pretty much mutinied on him. And then his generals mutinied on him. They all asked him to abdicate. He spent some time on this train. This drama all took place on a railroad car he was trying to get back to Tsarskoye Selo, where his family was, and it was stopped by revolutionaries. And he tried to go to another station, and then the generals pretty much all sent him telegrams asking him to abdicate. So he abdicated in this railroad car. And originally they thought that his son Alexei was they were just going to get a regent to take the throne until Alexei came of age.
Mm-hmm.
But Nicholas decided, you know, that with the kid had hemophilia, and they pointed out to him that, well, if you abdicate, you're probably going to get sent out of the country, and your kid's going to stay here. So that wasn't acceptable to him. So he abdicated for Alexei too, which was illegal, but nobody pressed the point at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then his brother took over for a couple days, but his brother really didn't want it. His brother was sort of like a playboy prince who never really wanted to be czar, so he abdicated too. And
wait. How was he
appointed?
Let me ask Rob a question. Wait, was Alexei the oldest brother, and how old would the playboy prince have even been at that point if they were waiting for Alexei to come of age? I'm a little confused with that one. I mean, what ages are we talking about?
He was his younger brother. I think he was a couple of years younger.
So he was
Not
only
much
like
younger.
16, but already a playboy, maybe?
No, Nicholas is
Oh, Nicholas's younger brother. Sorry, I was confused.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay,
No,
now,
the kid, Alexei was 13, or I think he was
yeah.
13
So,
at the time.
okay, sorry. Dumb question by me. I misunderstood. So, yeah, okay. So, and then basically the communists, there was some level of anarchy, and there wasn't any real clear plan. I got that from reading what you wrote about it. Is that correct? That they didn't know what to do with the Tsar exactly and his family.
No, they were the provisional. See, Lenin and the communists didn't take over right away. The first there was a provisional government, which is basically the Duma, the Russian parliament, made a provisional government. Which they were going to create a constituent assembly and write a new constitution, and they formed this temporary provisional government. But they had to share power with the Soviet because they were afraid that there was a precarious balance between the old Duma and the remnants of the landowners and remnants of the people who were even the people in the Duma didn't like Nicholas II, but they weren't ready to throw the Tsarist system overboard because they were beneficiaries of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of shared this precarious balance with the Soviet. And anyway,
Interesting.
where are we going with this?
Now I'll tell you one place we're going to go. I'd like to know were you fascinated by Rasputin? We haven't even mentioned his name yet. And is he a character? I mean, people don't even necessarily know how much of an influence he was. But is it because Alexander had such a weak husband in Nicholas II that she was drawn to Rasputin?
Well, I think Rasputin's hold on it had mostly to do with the fact that he was able to somehow heal that kid. That kid had a number of bleeding attacks that were fatal. The doctors thought he was going to die, and Rasputin somehow was able to. They don't know if it's been said it was coincidence and this and that, but it happened like too many times over a period of 12 years. There's really something odd. It's one of the strange things that makes the story so compelling. It's like, how was he able to do this? But he was a great character. If you could find a right actor to play him, he'd make a great character in the movie.
For sure.
I mean, he really was. He on the one hand, he's just a mixture of the sacred and profane. He had a lot of ideas. There was a cult in Russia called the Kleist, which was basically redemption through sexuality. Like they would have these underground churches where they would dance around, and then they would all fornicate, and then it was like if you sin and you repent, then that brings you closer to God. Like they say, you drive out sin with sin. And he picked up on some of those ideas. Apparently, the church, the Orthodox Church, kept trying to prosecute him. They kept bringing that up and telling Nicholas II that he was a Kleist, but they never could prove it. And Nicholas II just basically didn't want to hear it. Their idea was that holy men are always persecuted. If you look at the saints, if you read the books, they Saint Seraphim and all these other Russian holy men. There was an idea in Russia also about like wandering holy men. They called them what was the name for them?
I don't know.
Tsars. And they lived in monasteries, and it was kind of like having like a personal guru. So Rasputin he walked like 2,000 miles at one point. He walked to Greece. He did like years of wandering, living on alms, and he did seem to have some kind of a spirituality when he first went to St. Petersburg. But he was just corrupted by power. He was a very strong, charismatic personality, and a lot of people in St. Petersburg were looking for something new. There was a lot of interested in occultism and mysticism and stuff like that. It was the beginning of the 20th century.
Interesting.
Psychology and everything was just getting started. It was kind of coming out from under religion. So there's this kind of mixture of that and religion going on. And
sounds almost New Age.
Alexander was
like a cult leader, like almost New Age, using some stuff that already existed, whether Christianity or otherwise. I mean, a lot of people, and he certainly, I hate to say it, but so much of my knowledge of him is from that Boney M song, and like that the women, Russia's greatest love machine, I think is what the term is in that song. But maybe there's some truth to that.
Well, he frequented a lot of prostitutes.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people traded sexual favors for. He was giving out at one point during World War I when Nicholas, his power really increased when Nicholas went to the front to run the war, leaving Alexander there, and she turned more and more to Rasputin. And at one point, he was so influential that he had like hundreds of people waiting outside his apartment, and he would just see these petitioners all day, and people would come with these petitions, and he would write little notes to various government officials, and he would, there would be like a stack of things that he would, these notes that he would give to the empress and to different government men to pardon this or that person, make this or this Jewish person can stay and study at university, get this person's husband out of the front, or out of the war or whatever. And plus other,
go ahead.
Business, getting contracts for this and that, government contracts. But eventually, his reputation, some of Alexander's letters, personal letters to Rasputin, were stolen, and they were published in the papers, and it was a big embarrassment, and it added a lot to even though his influence wasn't what people thought, the public perception of his influence really damaged the credibility of the whole Romanov dynasty.
Was there something going on between him and Alexandria? Was there a sexual relationship going on?
No, there's no evidence of that at all. I've read about that exhaustively. They're sure that never happened. But the fact that people thought it happened was more important than the fact of whether it really happened or not.
Yeah, it seems like an obvious question to ask. One more thing I want to ask you before I let you go, Rob. Do you notice some parallels between the time right before the execution of the Czar and the Russian so-called revolution and what we're seeing today from the Antifa protesters in particular? I'm thinking a lot of that scene from Dr. Zhivago at the beginning, but I see a lot of similarities there in my limited knowledge of the situation.
What protesters are you talking about?
Like Antifa, when you see people in the streets in a place like Berkeley, or, all the rioters you see today, or do you just not pay that much attention to that? I mean, they bring out the Soviet flag.
Well, Russia was the thing that broke the back of the Czar system was World War I. Really, I mean, if we were to get into another war where the monetary system collapsed or some cataclysm, I could see it happening.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's probably not a coincidence that it occurred during World War I. Okay, you don't do much on social media, do you? I mean, you're on Facebook, Robert Hauser. I think you have a Twitter account. Any way people to follow you, or anything you recommend if people just want to learn more about the subject as a starting point?
I got a WordPress blog page. I'm just going to put some stuff on there.
What is it?
I just put my Elvis stuff on there.
Yeah, that's another topic for another time. How do people follow you on WordPress? What is the blog?
It's called Notes from Atlantis.
Notes from Atlantis on WordPress. Okay, and if people want to just learn more about the subject, is there one book people should read if they say this is kind of interesting, or one documentary people should watch?
For a book, I'd say Robert Massey's Nicholas and Alexandra is kind of like the definitive work on it. And Edward Radzinski wrote a lot about it. He's got one called The Last Czar. It's like the diary of the last Czar, the life and death of Nicholas II. And he's like a theatrical writer, and he's got a good writing style. It's very readable.
Anything on YouTube? Any quick documentaries for people to see to just get caught up on it? Not authentic.
There's one called Nicholas and Alexandra. It's on YouTube. It's one of the first ones that comes up.
Cool. All right.
Or you can just put it in the left. Yeah.
Rob Hauser, it's been good having you on. See, if you're listening to this rather than watching ongoing coverage of the hurricane, which is devastating, but you're not going to learn much, I would bet you'd probably learn a lot much more here listening to Rob these last 20 minutes or so. Rob Hauser, thanks for coming on today.